So we want to look at the patriarchs who are believed to be ancestors of the people of Israel, whom God have chosen to be the mirror of humanity in the Old Testament. And the patriarchs, we have talked about them in the Old Testament, are the forefathers or the founders of nations, tribes, and even clans and families. So here Abraham is believed to be the patriarch of the people of Israel. And in him we find faith and worship of one God. He belonged to a family which had faith and worshipped many gods. He was the son of Terah. And when you read, you find that they were people who believed in many gods. But God called him in order to show faith and worship in one God. Although Abraham had personal weaknesses, but he trusted God. When you read through, you find that he had weaknesses like all human beings, because our weakness it comes all the way from the fall of man through Adam and Eve. Then from Abraham we see Isaac. Isaac helps us to see trust in God. And then we see the marriage and keeping prosperity. Isaac produced 2 sons, but we have picked Jacob, who becomes the patriarch or the founder of Israel. He was not a perfect person, but also in him we find obedience according to his relationship with God. There are a number of failures committed by him, but he had obedience before God. This takes us to look at Joseph. He trusted in God's plan for his personal life, and this helps us to trust in God for personal life. Then Moses, who was called at a time when the people of Israel were seriously mistreated by the Egyptians, and he was called to lead a people of Israel from Egypt. Therefore we see a creation of a new nation through his leadership. Now, looking through these patriarchs, you will learn some specific ethical or moral teachings which can help us how to live personal lives, how we can live community lives, but above all, how we can live before God. And here are some lessons we can learn from the Egyptian slavery. First of all, we need to know that slavery is a condition of man after the fall. In fact, Egyptian slavery is a reflection of our spiritual slavery into sin. Without divine intervention, it is not possible to get freedom from sin and evil, or to be ethical. We have lived a life in a short span, about 20, 30. Most of us are young. But you can see what is happening in our short-lived time here on earth. And you have seen evil and sin, how it has distorted the way how we live. We have turned our backs against God, against our fellow human beings, even against ourselves. And therefore this is a condition which has been brought in human life because of the fall of Adam and Eve. But then, without divine intervention, we may remain sinners, we may remain enslaved. So, we find here that Moses' self-help represents man's effort to to be free from evil. When we find Moses, as reading the story, trying to help his brother, who was not a real brother but his fellow countryman, who was having a struggle with an Egyptian, and Moses stepped out to help him. This was an effort to liberate the mind and the body of the Israelites. We also sometimes employ our self-help measures to be free from evil, but we can't, because man cannot rescue himself from the slavery of sin. For example, various government institutions where we find that they have been involved in a number of things. One of them, the major one, is corruption. People have fought and struggled with corruption, but corruption has not gone. Instead, it has increased. So you look at your personal life and say, what is wrong with me? Where have I gone wrong? And the more you try to intervene using your self-help means, the more you fail. But then you need divine intervention. So, Egypt's slavery demonstrates that evil has a system under which it keeps people captive. You can sit and see through your personal life and the lives of the people around you that there is a system which keeps us captive. The system. It begins when we are young at home with your peers, within your family. It goes in the community where you live or your society. It goes where you have gone to school. Because there is a system of words, there is a system of seeing, there is a system of hearing, there is a system of doing. That system brings together a complete whole system under which people are kept captive or sinners. So in this case, we drive towards what we call the Pentateuch, the Decalogue, which we have already talked about, the 5 books of the law. And we say that law is the foundation of Old Testament ethics, because the law had been put in place to check human behavior. And law here refers to the Pentateuch. Israel was a theocracy, a nation ruled by God, or a form of government in which a state is understood as governed by immediate divine guidance, provided to ruling clergy or other ruling officials. The clergy and other officials were put in place to rule the people on behalf of God. So being a theocracy, Israel made no distinction between social and personal ethics. God was the embodying or the overshadowing power that controlled social and personal ethics. He was both religious and social. That's why the people of Israel did not have a dividing line between politics and religion, between religion and economics, and so on. So, there are commands of God that would help to lead people at least to live a better life regarding God as the overseer. So these commands are eternal, universal values, indispensable to the fulfillment of the individual and society. In other words, they cannot be separated from individual and society life. They are supposed to be fulfilled. If we have to worship, if we have to respect, and give ourselves and meet the standard and purpose that God created human beings for. Holiness is a central concept that unifies Old Testament ethics. Without holiness, which holiness is broad, because holiness brings the character of God, His perfectness, His justice, His righteousness. So, it brings the concept that unifies Old Testament ethics. The Hebrew word for holy is to be set apart. When you are separated from others, you are meant to be different from them. That's why we find the people of Israel were set apart from other people in order to show God's holiness. And in this case, we say God is set apart from creation. He is not this. Even if He created, He is out of creation. So God's people, the Israelites, is to be set apart as distinctive nation and reflect God's character. This would tell us that even me and you, if we say that the people of Israel are supposed to be a reflection of God's character, then for us we should be looking at the people of Israel as our mirror. And from that we should be able to reflect God's character. And if we fail to reflect God's character, then there are consequences, because there is an order we talked about. So this brings us to look at the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments were given on 2 different tablets of stones. The first stone consisted of laws of reverence to God. The second one was reverence to man, which we talked about as laws of protection. So, why was the law needed yet it was not there before? Why was it needed? This is what we say, that human nature had to be exposed through the heart of man. Law cannot make man good or change his heart, but the heart can reflect what is human nature. What comes out of the heart is what human nature lives, and therefore it can portray who we are. And we are supposed to receive the word, believe in it by heart, and then what we do with the body will be a reflection of what we have in our hearts. These spell out duties to God, especially the first tablet. It talks about worship. Here God emphasizes God's sovereignty. He is the only God. He permits no divided loyalty. If you have 2 gods or 2 masters, your loyalty will be divided. And Jesus was teaching that either you will serve one and hate the other. It introduces new gods to Israel, reducing God to pagan gods. In other words, by this way of worship, we are introduced to understand other gods in Israel's eyes, that if they worship them, they will reduce their God to the level of these other gods. He will have no meaning in their lives. Then the second one was restricting the people of Israel from making pagan gods in form of images, either the image represented by a bird or by animal or a stone or a pillar, and therefore he requires purity of worship. And we know when we read through the story of the people of Israel, at one point or many other points, they would always turn away from God and worship the God or the gods of the Canaanites. Even today we have people who have turned their way from God, and they are worshiping either money, they are worshiping fellow human beings, they worship their jobs, and so many other things, such that they don't pay attention to giving wholehearted worship to their God. Blasphemy. This deals with reverence to God in all deeds and word. Revere. It deals with the attitude of the heart than the reverence of the tongue. What we say should be relevant in relation to what the heart has. But when we have the word which is not in relation to what the heart is, then it becomes blasphemy. He says, you should never, at any cost, swear in the name of God in vain. You see, if you swear by God's name in vain, then it means you are blaspheming God. This is very good for you lawyers and health practitioners who mostly take oath. Lawyers, you take oath to defend the truth. Healthcare practitioners take their oath to protect life. But when you go back and you look at it, there is a lot of lies in courts of law. There is a lot of degrading life among health practitioners, and yet we have taken an oath. So, this is the third commandment, which forbids misuse of God's name, prohibiting being untruthful in all our deeds. Then we have the fourth commandment, which we talked about, the Sabbath. Keep the Sabbath holy. This means the day of rest, God's day of rest, which He requested us also to give respect. God rested on Sabbath. When we do the same, we are being like God, or we respect God. And that is what we call our duty. But also under that one, we have the fifth commandment of honoring our parents. Honor your father and mother. Honor means taking parents seriously. Because here God put our parents, which of these will be a parent tomorrow as a father or a mother, and you take the same role like God wanted. That your children should honor you. And if you don't honor your parents today, don't cry out tomorrow when your children do not honor you. So children are to take care for aged parents, because there is a reward which He says long life. We have to respect our parents because they stand here on behalf of God. We see them the way how we should be seeing God. When you honor our parents or your parents, at the same time you are honoring God. Duty to man. Do not kill. Do not kill. This embodies the universal principle of sanctity of human life. Truly aspect of divine nature of life. Life is divine. You should not take away. And in some cases say, do not take away what you cannot bring back. Don't take away life because you don't have any capacity to bring it back. It is a universal principle of respect for life. Do not kill. Do not commit adultery. This expresses the principle of sacredness of marriage, before and even after. Engaging in sex before or even after. Do not steal. Stealing refers to direct or indirect theft. Even when you fail to pay workers their due wages, you are stealing. Caring for the poor, for those with what to share, is very important also. You are cheating God because God has given you in order to give others. Do not bear false witness as the ninth. This forbids false witness in court or even gossip. Human beings are very good at gossiping and even telling false, which we call truth. So true testimony regarding neighbors is very, very important. Testify in truth. Some people testify falsely in order to bring down their neighbors, and it waters down the love of a neighbor. It waters down the love of self. Because say, love your neighbor is you love yourself. If you hate your neighbor, that means you are hating yourself too. Duty to self. Do not covet. This means to set the heart upon something very useful for you and you personalize it. Don't look at other people's property, riches and whatever, and you covet after them. So in other words, he says, don't desire what belongs to another. It might be a wife, it can be children, it can be a house, it can be a car, it can be anything, as long as it belongs to somebody, does not belong to you. Do not desire, do not covet it. And when you put all these things together, they define our morality or our ethics. Israel presented here as the priesthood and a nation of kings. And we say that only a nation given special commands, it was the only nation given special commands. These commands that God gave to the people of Israel, they were people who were isolated from others, and they were given these commands. And as I said, that when they follow them, when they obey them, then we should also understand from the experience of life that these commands are beneficial, and then we put them into practice. All were meant to be priests, although Levites were distinguished as priesthood among the priests. God wanted to be the Israelites' king so that they can worship him and later on usher in the Messiah, the Savior. So, this takes us to look at, because of the failure of man, it takes us to look at the first king, King Saul. He became corrupt because of politics and power. He started to see himself be puffed with pride and power, and as a result, he failed. He did not meet God's standards. Also, it brings us to look at David, who replaced Saul. We know David was chosen, and the word that defined David was that was a man after God's heart. And we see through his life that without obedience to God, a ruler will end up making mistakes. There are places where David would falter like a human being. But we know that David is acknowledged to have been a repentant person. Prophets for moral awareness. In the Bible, Old Testament, we look at the minor and major prophets. In Jeremiah chapter 4, verse 1 to 2, He's calling the people of Israel to return to the Lord. If your life is to be ethical or to be blessed, they had turned their backs against God. They have met so many hardships. Therefore, he's calling them to return to the Lord, to observe the ethical system that had been put in place so that they can get a blessing. The ethical role of the prophets was to make people return to God, to remind people of the commandments of God, and remind the people of the consequences of sin. You may act as a prophet, or you can listen to what the prophets have said in the Old Testament, with the mind that you are calling people to return to the Lord. You are reminded of the commandments that can keep you on the track. And you are reminding the people and yourself the consequences of failure or sin. In this case, we say, sin and evil shall not go unpunished. In the conclusion, we look at the major lessons from the Old Testament. That life and the universe were created by God, and the Creator has a purpose, and the scriptures are the manual by which humans should live their lives. So the Bible helps us to understand what God wants us. Why did He, first of all, in the first place, create us? If He created us, then there is a purpose, and that purpose should be fulfilled. And to know about ourselves and our relationship with God, then we read the Bible, because it is the manual by which we can understand our assignment. Secondly, each nation exists as a whole for a given purpose, which the leaders must find out and ensure that it is fulfilled. When you become a leader, whether it is a leader of a nation or a group of people, know that there is a purpose why you have been made a leader. Find out and ensure that the purpose is fulfilled. If it is not fulfilled, you will be responsible, much as the people will be responsible, but your responsibility will be greater than that one of the people. So as leaders, we must ensure that we fulfill the purpose why God brought us into the world.